It feels like every day there's some new global thing happening, like a huge shift or development.
Sure. Yeah.
And we all want to like cut through all that noise,
Right.
figure out what's really driving things. What actually matters.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're going to do today. We are diving deep into this escalating tension around something you might have heard about, the U.S.-China chip war.
Exactly. And this isn't just some like techie inside baseball thing. This competition for control over these tiny little things, semiconductors, is really reshaping the whole balance of power in the world.
Wow.
I mean, think about it. It touches everything. The devices we use every day, how countries align with each other, even the way wars are fought.
Right.
Like what we're seeing right now in Ukraine.
Right. And we've gone through some really crucial information that lays bare how important these little chips actually are.
Yeah.
So the mission for this deep dive is to get a clear picture of what's fueling this conflict, what are the U.S. and China doing about it, what's the role of Taiwan. It feels like they're at the center of it all.
Yeah.
They are.
And just what are the big implications for the rest of the world?
Huge.
Right.
Exactly.
Let's jump right in. So, when we say semiconductors are microchips, what exactly are we talking about, and why has this become like the resource that everyone's fighting over?
Yeah. You can think of it this way. Semiconductors are like the central nervous system of our digital world. And when that system starts to have problems, well, everything feels it, from something as simple as your alarm clock in the morning all the way up to, global defense systems. But at their core, they're really just incredibly complex circuits etched onto these teeny tiny pieces of material.
The central nervous system. That's such a powerful way to put it. It really drives home how fundamental they are.
Yeah.
So give us some concrete examples.
Yeah.
Because like most people just think, oh, it's my phone, it's my computer. But, it goes way beyond that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, of course, you've got the obvious ones, your smartphone, your laptop, but, artificial intelligence, which is becoming such a huge part of so many different industries, relies on these advanced chips.
Right.
Then you move into more specialized areas, things like modern fighter jets, sophisticated missile guidance systems, even the satellites we have orbiting the planet all depend on these semiconductors to function. It really is a foundational technology.
So we're not just talking about our gadgets. We're talking about national security, like how countries defend themselves. We're talking about how technology advances in the future.
Exactly.
So let's play this out. What happens if a country, or even worse, the whole world, has their supply of these chips disrupted? What's the worst case scenario?
Well, the fallout could be pretty significant. I mean, we'd likely see a major global economic slowdown. Imagine industries across the board suddenly unable to get the parts they need to make things. And then progress in crucial areas like AI development or the rollout of 5G, all that would be severely impacted. And from a defense standpoint, think about it. A country that can't get the latest semiconductors, well, they might find their military capabilities lagging behind. They lose their edge.
Right.
It puts them at a disadvantage.
That's a scary thought. And, looking back historically, the U.S. has always been the leader in this space. Right?
Oh, for sure. For decades, the United States has been at the forefront of both the innovation and the production of semiconductors. Companies like Intel, NVIDIA, Qualcomm, they've been driving forces behind all these advancements we've seen. But here's the thing. In recent years, we've seen this really deliberate and significant push by China to become self-sufficient in this area. They want to control their own destiny when it comes to chips. And that ambition, that's a key driver of the tension we're seeing right now.
All right, so that sets the stage. Now let's get into why the U.S. is so actively trying to slow down China's growth in the semiconductor industry. What's the big picture thinking behind that strategy?
Well, from the U.S. point of view, China's rapid progress in semiconductors is seen as a multi-pronged threat. It's not just about who makes more money. It's got big national security implications, too. The U.S. sees China getting really good at this, and they're worried it could undermine their own leadership in the world. At the end of the day, the U.S. wants to stay on top in terms of technology, and in the 21st century, the key to that is controlling the chips.
And how is the U.S. actually doing that? What steps have they taken to try and put the brakes on China's progress?
Oh, they've made some pretty significant moves. One that really stands out is the ban they put on Huawei back in 2019. That basically cut Huawei off from getting chips designed and made in the U.S., which was a huge blow to this major Chinese telecom company.
Right.
And then in 2022, they slapped export controls on these really advanced AI chips. That was clearly aimed at holding back China's development of things like supercomputing and artificial intelligence, which are, crucial for both civilian and military applications.
And didn't they also do something to restrict the actual equipment used to make these chips? Something about specialized machines.
That's right. Between 2023 and 2024, the U.S. has been increasingly putting sanctions on major Chinese chip makers like SexMic.
Right.
A key part of this is restricting access to these things called EUV lithography machines. EUV stands for extreme ultraviolet. These machines are like the crown jewels of chip making. They use incredibly precise optics. It takes years of specialized knowledge to even build and operate them. There are only a handful of companies worldwide that can actually make these things.
Wow.
The main supplier is a Dutch company called ASML, and the U.S. has been putting a lot of pressure on the Netherlands to limit how many of those machines they sell to China.
It's a full court press. So they're going after the design, they're going after the manufacturing, and they're even going after the tools needed for production.
Yep.
So what's driving all this? Is it mostly about military concerns or is it more about economic competition?
Well, it's a mix of both, really. On the military side, there's this huge worry about advanced semiconductors being used to create, the next generation of AI-powered weapons.
Uh-huh.
Think about things like making missiles more accurate or boosting cyber warfare capabilities. The U.S. wants to make sure they stay ahead of the curve on all that.
Right.
Then there's the economic side. The U.S. sees China making strides in chip technology, and they want to protect their own businesses and keep that global dependence on U.S. and allied technology.
So it's a power play on multiple fronts.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So China's obviously not just sitting back and taking all this right. How are they responding to all this pressure?
No, they're not just taking it. They see these U.S. actions as a direct threat to their own economic growth and their national security, and they've responded strategically with huge state-backed investments. One of their main strategies is this thing called the Made in China 2025 initiative. It basically sets these ambitious targets for China to become self-sufficient in crucial technologies, and semiconductors are at the top of the list. We're talking about the Chinese government throwing massive amounts of money at this, over $200 billion to boost their domestic research, development, and manufacturing of chips. $200 billion. That's just an insane amount of money. So where is all that money going? What are they actually doing with it?
That's what I want to know. What's the concrete impact?
Well, a big chunk of that money is going into building and expanding domestic chip fabrication plants, places like SMEC. They're really pushing to ramp up their capacity to produce more advanced chips on their own. They're also looking for friends in other places, forming strategic alliances with countries that are also facing U.S. sanctions, like Russia and Iran. It's like they're trying to create this alternative network for getting the stuff they need.
Interesting.
And here's another interesting thing. There are reports that Chinese companies have been stockpiling U.S.-made chips like crazy. It's like they're anticipating even tougher restrictions in the future, so they're trying to build up a reserve.
Wow. So they're playing the long game here, securing the tech they need today while trying to build their own capabilities for tomorrow. But there's a big roadblock, isn't there? The
Right.
sources talk about this major dependence on Taiwan.
Yeah, that's the Achilles heel in their plan. China relies heavily on Taiwan, especially a company called TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. TSMC is the world leader in making the most sophisticated chips, the ones that are essential for things like cutting-edge AI and all the top-tier military applications. That dependence is a major vulnerability for China.
And that brings us to the most sensitive and strategically important part of this whole thing, Taiwan. They really are at the heart of the global semiconductor industry, aren't they?
No question about it. Taiwan is like the linchpin, the central point holding the whole global semiconductor ecosystem together. Think about this. They're responsible for over 60% of the world's semiconductor production.
Wow.
And when you look specifically at the most advanced chips, the ones that are crucial for AI, advanced computing, all the new military tech, their market share jumps to over 90%.
It's amazing.
It's incredible. To have that much cutting-edge manufacturing concentrated in one place, it makes Taiwan incredibly valuable, strategically essential on a global scale.
It's not just important, it's irreplaceable, at least for the foreseeable future. And that obviously has huge geopolitical implications.
It does. The United States relies heavily on Taiwan for those advanced semiconductors. So keeping Taiwan safe and stable is a core national interest for the U.S. Any disruption to that supply chain would have massive ripple effects. I mean, we're talking about major damage to industries worldwide. But here's the other side of the coin. China sees Taiwan as a breakaway province, and they want it back under their control. And they've made it very clear that they haven't ruled out using force to make that happen.
And that's where things get really tense, isn't it? Because any military action around Taiwan wouldn't just be a humanitarian disaster. It would essentially shut down the global supply of these crucial chips, which could trigger a worldwide economic crisis unlike anything we've ever seen.
Absolutely. The fact that everyone depends on these semiconductors, it just adds fuel to the fire in this already complicated and delicate situation between the US and China. It raises the stakes of any potential confrontation even higher. It's almost like the entire global economy is riding on the fate of this one island. And what's interesting is that this whole chip war is actually having a real impact on other conflicts happening around the world. The sources mention the situation in Ukraine.
Right. The war in Ukraine is showing just how much this U.S.-China chip war matters.
Hmm.
Because of all the sanctions the West has imposed, Russia's in a tough spot.
Hmm.
They're desperate for semiconductors to keep their military equipment running, things like missiles and drones and sophisticated communication systems.
And where are they getting those chips?
Well, there are more and more reports saying they're getting them through China.
Hmm.
Even though the U.S. has warned them about the consequences,
Hmm.
this puts China in a really difficult position.
Right.
On one hand, the U.S. is telling them to stop supplying Russia or face more economic penalties. But on the other hand, China sees Russia as a key partner in their push against the West.
So they're caught between a rock and a hard place, trying to balance their own interests with the potential backlash from the U.S. And this whole situation really highlights how modern warfare, the kind we're seeing in Ukraine, is becoming more and more reliant on these advanced chips.
That's not just a future problem, it's happening right now. The conflict in Ukraine has shown how important things like drones and AI targeting and advanced cyber capabilities are becoming, and all of that depends on a steady supply of those advanced chips.
It's amazing how this battle over these tiny components can have such a huge impact in so many different areas.
It really shows how interconnected everything is. So what's next?
Mm.
What are some of the scenarios that could play out in this U.S.-China chip war? Feels like we're still at the beginning of this story.
Oh, for sure. This is a long game, a battle for technological dominance that will shake the entire 21st century. The sources lay out a few possibilities. One is what they call technological decoupling. That's where the US and China essentially develop completely separate technology ecosystems, almost like a digital iron curtain that limits how their technologies work together.
Right.
It could fragment the global tech landscape.
That sounds like a future with a lot of roadblocks and inefficiencies.
Yeah, it wouldn't be good. Another big worry is a potential Taiwan crisis. As we discussed, any military action involving Taiwan would be devastating for the global supply chain. We'd see a massive chip shortage with severe economic consequences worldwide. And then there's the race for AI and quantum computing. Whoever wins the chip war is going to have a huge leg up in those areas, which will be critical for things like cybersecurity, even space exploration.
So at the end of the day, it's not just about who can make the best chips right now. It's about who's going to have the most power and influence in the years to come. This whole fight for semiconductor supremacy is really a fight for the future.
Exactly.
So let's recap. We've talked about how these tiny little semiconductors are actually the foundation of all our modern technology in the global economy. We look at why the U.S. is so determined to restrict China's access to these chips and the different strategies they're using. We also saw how China is fighting back with massive investments in their own chip-making capabilities, and how their dependence on Taiwan creates a huge challenge for them. And speaking of Taiwan, we discussed how vital they are to the global chip supply and how that makes them this incredibly sensitive geopolitical flashpoint. We even saw how this chip war is playing out in real time in places like Ukraine. And finally, we talked about some of the potential futures that could unfold, from technological decoupling to a Taiwan crisis to this intense race to dominate AI and quantum computing.
It really makes you realize how connected everything is in our world. A fight over these tiny ships can have massive consequences everywhere.
It really does. So here's something for all of you listening to think about. Given all the interconnectedness we've talked about today, what other conflicts or new technologies might be affected by this U.S.-China chip war in ways we haven't even considered yet? It feels like the ripples from this battle are going to keep spreading in unpredictable ways for a long time to come.
That's a great question, and one worth keeping in mind. This is a dynamic situation. It's a technological and geopolitical competition that's constantly evolving, and it's going to keep shaping our world in ways we can't even imagine right now.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.